Good morning. We're about to get started. I hope everybody is doing well. My name is Michelle Lavelle Henry, and I'm a member of the Social Justice Forum. And the Social Justice Forum's focus this year is acting based on our values, avoiding despair, in which we are seeking to understand our continuing responsibility to help build a loving, sustainable, and just community. Today, we are pleased to welcome back Katie Dillon, Director of Align Minneapolis, a coalition of 19 faith communities, including Westminster, and people with lived experiences who work together to address homelessness in our community. Katie is a member of Plymouth Congregational Church, has a master's of social work, and has worked in homeless prevention. Her presentation will provide information on current context and trends about homelessness in Minneapolis and Minnesota. She'll explore what it looks like to be working while experiencing homelessness and share solutions and ways our faith community can play a role in addressing homelessness. But before we begin the presentation, I want to go over a few logistics. We ask that you hold your questions and comments until after Katie's presentation. I'll also address the live stream at that time as well. For those attending in person, we'll bring a microphone to you to share your questions and comments, including those on the live stream, so we can hear your concerns. But those in the audience, I want to make sure that you have the microphone up to your mouth because you can see the difference. So we can hear you, and also the audience on the live stream can as well. For those attending on the live stream, submit your comments or questions in the live stream chat, and we'll monitor that and raise your questions during the question and answer period. As part of an ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations and concerns in our community, we have established a few guidelines. Before we get started, we will have a short prayer, but I'd also like to review the next slide as well. So now let us pray. Holy God, Holy One of Justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of the voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness so that we may honor the divine in all people. Amen. So now I welcome Katie Dillon.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here for the presentation today. It's always great to be in our congregations and be talking about this topic that I know is on everybody's hearts and minds. As Michelle mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So certainly whatever is coming up for you, would love to try to address that. But I want to start by sharing a little bit about Align. Michelle mentioned a little bit about our background, and I'm sure a lot of you know as well, especially if you've been to one of my previous presentations here, or if you're plugged into some of the social justice work. Align Minneapolis was founded in 2008. We originally began as the Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness, and Westminster was one of the founding members. It was really born out of the downtown clergy group that meets monthly, and recognizing that a lot of congregations were doing things to address homelessness, but there was no coordinated effort at that time. And so the downtown clergy really saw that there was an opportunity to come together, pool resources, and kind of make a commitment to addressing this issue. So since that time, Align has grown to 19 faith congregations, and we've grown out of the downtown core. We actually just added our newest congregation, Diamond Lake Lutheran, within this last year. They're all the way down at 54th and Portland. So they're our farthest out congregation now. But because of that, we changed our name to Align Minneapolis in 2018. I want to mention, and I'll get a little bit more into this later, but really one of the core tenets of Align is partnering with, walking with, and listening to people with lived experiences of homelessness. We know that people with lived experiences of homelessness have expertise and know what solutions work for ending homelessness, and that we cannot do this work without them as an organization. So we support a group called Street Voices of Change. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but they are represented on our Align Steering Committee, which is sort of like our board of directors as well, and we're really walking with and partnering with that group on an ongoing basis to shape, the work that we do. We really at Align look at a multi-pronged approach to addressing homelessness. So everything from preventing homelessness from occurring in the first place to meeting immediate needs when folks are experiencing homelessness or housing instability, and as well to long-term systemic change and trying to address some of the underlying causes of homelessness. And as an organization, we're really small staff-wise. I'm the only full-time staff person, and then we have a quarter-time staff person who works on our emergency rental assistance program. But we really see our power lying in, of course, our faith congregations and our partnerships there, the thousands of people that are part of those congregations, as well as other coalitions within the state that are doing similar work and that we can, participate with around legislative advocacy, around learning, listening to people with lived experience across the state. So I want to get a little bit into the current context of homelessness, and I'm going to go through a lot of numbers, right? And data is important. It helps to inform our work. It helps to inform work of, service providers in the area. But when I get into data, I always like to really take a moment to pause and remember that behind every number is a person, right? A whole human being worthy of love and dignity and care and, of course, housing. And especially now, and I'll mention this as well kind of throughout my presentation, but right now is a really, really hard time to be experiencing any type of marginalization. We know that folks experiencing homelessness often talk about how they feel. Okay, thank you for calling that out. Is this a little bit better? Yeah, thank you. So people experiencing homelessness will often talk about how they feel invisible. People don't want to look at them. People want to cross to the other side of the street. They might feel less than human in going about their day. And I think now more than ever, what we're hearing from our folks experiencing homelessness is there's an added trauma of a context in our federal government leadership wanting to criminalize and institutionalize folks experiencing homelessness. So it's an especially difficult time. And whenever I'm with faith communities, because I know that you are here because you have a love for humans, a love for each other, a love for God's creation, I really like to remind us that that we're talking about people and that we can hold people in our heart and we can care for people as we're doing this work. So getting a little bit into the data, there's a study that happens periodically done by Wilder Foundation, and the most recent full homelessness study was completed in 2023. It found that over 10,000 Minnesotans were experiencing homelessness, and the good news was that this was down 7% from the record high in 2018. However, it was still the second highest since that study began in 1991. We know, based on this ongoing study, that there's a disproportionate representation of people of color in the homelessness population, and especially Indigenous people. There is historic trauma and marginalization that contributes to this, including things like redlining, racial covenants in deeds that have excluded people historically from different housing opportunities. We also know from this study that the kind of really unfortunate news, I mean, it's all unfortunate, but that the older adults, so people 55 and older, are the largest population that is growing in experiencing homelessness. So that population was up 7% between 2018 and 2023. There's a lot of reasons why we know this is, but one of them is certainly the higher cost of living, higher rents, but incomes not keeping up with that, especially fixed incomes. As well, we know that when people are older, they're experiencing other types of health issues and other types of pressures that can contribute to this. So there's also another data point where every year there's something called a point in time count. This is done for the federal government, but it's done in every local jurisdiction. And in this past January 2025, the point in time count counted 3,078 people in Hennepin County experiencing homelessness. This represents a pretty significant decrease from the previous year, a 20% decrease. Most of that was families with children, with minor children. But we also know that this represents 427 unsheltered people, and then the rest being sheltered. And that might look like they're staying in a homeless shelter. It might look like they're staying on couches of friends, things like that. But we know that, any person unsheltered is really very vulnerable. And then I just want to mention something a little bit about shelters. So in Hennepin County, there are a number of different adult shelter options, and there's a total of about 830 beds, give or take, on any given night for those adult shelters. And then in the winter, so they actually just opened up as of yesterday, November 1st, there's additional winter beds that come online, about 50 beds. So on any given night in the winter, you're looking at just under about 900 beds. And so knowing that, there are over 3,000 people experiencing homelessness, there's a little bit of a mismatch there. And then I want to just talk a little bit about housing affordability and gaps in affordable housing access. So when we talk about housing affordability, what we mean, the definition of that is that somebody is paying about 30% of their income to rent. That is considered affordable. In Hennepin County, there's an estimate that there's about 35,000 units of a gap between what is needed and what is available. So it would take about 35,000 additional units of affordable housing to meet the need. And what that means is that renters are then what's called cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income to rent. And the estimate in Hennepin County is that 60,000 households are actually spending about half or more of their income on rent. So you can imagine then it doesn't leave a lot of room for emergency savings or, managing different crises that might come up. It doesn't leave a lot of room for anything else. So of course, we all know, if we've been kind of paying a little bit of attention to the news, that there are certainly a lot of pressures that are kind of coming down the pipe that we're preparing for at this point. And in fact, because of the federal government shutdown, one of these pressures actually just happened yesterday, which was that folks who receive SNAP or food stamp benefits did not see those benefits come through yesterday. And so that puts quite a bit of pressure on folks with their budgets and will cause them, cause people to have to choose, are they going to purchase food or are they going to pay rent, things like that. We also know that there are federal cuts coming to Medicaid and to that food stamp SNAP program. Those are set to go into effect after the midterm elections. So there is a little bit of time to prepare for those. But we know that any cuts to additional supports for people who are housing unstable or experiencing homelessness make it much harder for them to have their needs met. We also have, at the same time, currently, state funding sources really starting to tighten. A number of years ago, there was some budget surplus that was able to be dedicated to different housing needs. Now that budget surplus is gone, and so there's a tightening of state funds, and this includes a emergency rental assistance homeless prevention fund that is quite a bit more restricted now than it was a couple of years ago. That funding is called FHPAP. And then Hennepin County as well, their emergency assistance programs have tightened, and they are not offering emergency rental assistance to folks to keep them in their homes until folks are in housing court. We've actually seen a direct impact into our emergency rental assistance program. Our application volume has significantly increased. The number of people coming to try to apply to our program has significantly increased. So all of these different shrinking pools of funds are, of course, impacting what we're seeing as well. And then I mentioned, how difficult and how much additional trauma is happening with folks experiencing homelessness right now, marginalization, criminalization, and in addition, violence that people are experiencing. I won't get a ton into encampments, but I will mention that folks staying in encampments are much more likely to be the victims of violence than they are to be the perpetrators of violence. They're a very vulnerable population. And so I just ask that, we recognize that there's quite a lot of violence that people are experiencing out in the community. So I want to dive a little bit into a subpopulation of people experiencing homelessness, those that are working while experiencing homelessness. And our organizing guide that we publish a few times a year, Elena has graciously provided some copies for folks if you want to take them. The most recent guide that we published this fall is focused on this population of people working while experiencing homelessness. So if this is something that resonates with you, I encourage you to take a copy of the guide. It really dives even deeper into education around this topic. The estimate is that 53% of people experiencing people living in shelter and 40% of people experiencing homelessness overall are working. I think sometimes it's a little bit of a misconception that folks who are experiencing homelessness may not be working, but the data shows that almost half really are. But the biggest issue that comes out of that still perpetuates the homelessness, the biggest issue is that there's a gap between what is a livable wage and helps you to be able to afford rent and what is the actual wage that people are making. So there is a statistic from the Minnesota Housing Partnership who does incredible work around some of these statistics. In the 7-county metro, minimum wage workers must work 95 hours per week to afford a modest 1-bedroom apartment, and 116 hours for a 2-bedroom apartment. So you can see that even when folks are working, if their wages don't support, being able to pay rent, the math doesn't work. So this is another data point this is one from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, where they were addressing different regions and different cities where, talking about affordability. So the estimate in Minnesota, and actually it is probably a little bit higher in Minneapolis, is that a housing wage, meaning being able to afford housing, working a regular job, would be $28.23 per hour. So you can imagine, the average, just kind of retail worker or, just a regular job that most folks will be working. In Minneapolis, we do have a $15 minimum wage, but that's a pretty big gap between the $15 minimum wage and the $28.23 livable wage. And I was doing some research on the Minnesota economic website, and, most jobs are around $17 an hour, so a little better than that minimum wage, but still not livable. Additional challenges that come up for folks who are working while experiencing homelessness, and this is really informed by informed by some of the stories that we hear from our folks with lived experience. If folks are working a different shift than a normal shift, so second shift, third shift, it can be really hard to navigate then being able to access shelter because of the different hours that shelters might have, the different hours when they require you to check in order to keep your bed for the night. As well as, meal times when they're able to be provided with meals at shelter may not work with their schedule. They also have experienced stigma when applying for jobs. So, putting in a job application that your address is 1010 Curry at one of the shelters may not always, work in your favor when you're applying for jobs. We've also heard that access to transportation and access to being able to get to jobs can be really challenging. Folks are limited in their geography based on where they're staying, and so that's an additional challenge. One other thing that we hear when folks are staying in shelter, there is storage for folks in shelter, but it's not always adequate and it's not always as secure as folks would like it to be. So having their uniforms for their jobs or, their tools, if depending on what type of job they're doing, that can be really difficult to maintain those things while staying in shelter and working. So we want to get a little bit into responses and solutions, right? We know what a lot of the challenges are, and the good news is that we also know what a lot of the solutions are. And this is, this is a positive thing, and we just know that we need to kind of double and triple down on it. But number one, of course, listening to people with lived experience. As I mentioned, those people have expertise in what it takes to get out of homelessness and stay out of homelessness. And so we really want to be centering their voices. When I get a little bit more into Street Voices of Change, you'll hear how some of that happens. Creating community of people with lived experiences of homelessness is incredibly important so that those folks don't feel as isolated, don't feel as marginalized. I will tell you, I sit in the twice a week meetings that Street Voices of Change has, and the resources and knowledge and sharing that happens in those rooms is transformative. Not only is it, hey, where can I find a phone, where can I get a phone? But it's also, sharing in some of the experience and sharing some of, the trauma and being able to care for each other. It's also about empowerment, coming together in a group of people where you're not the only one who has that experience. And then if you're going to testify at the state legislature, you've got people backing you up. That is huge. We also know that prevention works. Prevention, right? I mean, it's true in healthcare and it's true in homelessness, that if you can prevent somebody from falling into homelessness and keeping them out of that system, it is incredibly effective at reducing homelessness overall. And the financial side of it is that it is incredibly cost effective to keep people in their homes. Maybe it's $1,500, $3,000 to keep somebody in their home, get them caught back up on back due rent, versus if they go into the system, that's tens of thousands of dollars each year. 24/7 shelter is something that ended up happening during COVID. It's something that folks with lived experience had talked about for years. If you don't have to get up and get out of shelter by 6, 7 a.m., you can stay, you can maybe meet with your case manager, or maybe you can work on applying for jobs, and you don't have to worry about where am I going to go in the day. And so during COVID, there was additional funding that was dedicated to 24/7 shelter. The data then showed that the housing outcomes were better. And so that's something that Hennepin County has committed to try to continue because they know it works. We also know that case management for exiting homelessness is incredibly helpful. Case management can look like somebody who's walking with you through all of those steps that you need to take in order to get housing, which can be, difficult to navigate on a good day for anybody. Up. Up. Okay. Is this better?
Right here, like
Thanks. So case management, somebody to walk with you through all of those pieces. So in order to apply for housing, you're going to need to have an ID. In order to apply for housing, you're going to need to be able to show what your income is and prove that. And so walking with you through all of those pieces, walking with you through applying, walking with you through accessing different voucher programs or different support programs. And then we also know that because housing can be really unaffordable for folks, those rental vouchers, so some people will call it Section 8, but there's other types of vouchers as well. Really, they're there to close that gap between what is affordable for someone and what is the actual rent. So just as an example, let's say someone's on Social Security disability income. Let's say it's about $900 a month. So what would be affordable to them would be about $300 worth of rent per month. There's really no options for $300 of rent per month for a place. And so that voucher will then make up that difference. So let's say the rent was $1,100, the person would pay $300, and that rental voucher will make up that other $800. And then building more affordable housing, of course, helps. Anything we can add to that gap in affordable housing units is really important. The other piece is ongoing statewide investment. This is something that we, in our legislative advocacy, are working for in the long term, because right now there is no dedicated source of funding that goes into housing, whether that's building housing or supportive services. And so really the funding stream can be so, just really all over the place. It's very hard for developers to plan for. So that ongoing committed investment would be really important. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on Align's work. Of course, a lot of you are familiar with our work, and a lot of you have been to these presentations before, but just touching a little bit on our work. So I mentioned that multi-pronged approach. On the homelessness prevention end, we have an emergency rental assistance program where we work to get people caught up on their back due rent during a short-term financial crisis. So maybe somebody had an emergency car repair, or maybe they were between jobs for a few weeks, got behind on their rent, and now they could be facing eviction and could be facing homelessness. Our program accepts applications. We have a process that folks go through, and then if that application is approved, then we're able to get them caught up on their back due rent so they're stable going forward. Last year, we helped over 120 households to be able to remain in their home. In terms of in meeting immediate needs, we have a number of congregations that provide direct service to the community. So this might look like nursing care, it might look like a free store, it might look like diapers or household goods, bus cards, gas cards to get to work. So we have a number of different congregations that provide those resources. And then that group gets together monthly to coordinate resources, talk about what challenges are out there. As an example, we had a laundry voucher program at one of our congregations over in South Minneapolis. But we recognize that when folks are doing their laundry, it's really hard. You don't want to have to schlep it across the whole city in order to go do your laundry. So one of our other congregations was able to create a laundry voucher program for a more central location to downtown. And then when we talk about long-term change, a lot of this happens within our congregational organizing, and that might look like legislative advocacy. It might look like people getting more educated on topics and really kind of getting activated to take action. And we're also then working with statewide coalitions, as I mentioned earlier, on some of those broader legislative advocacy pieces at the state level. I'll just put in a little plug. Holly is going to give a little bit of a pitch maybe to help participate in some of the congregational organizing at Westminster a little later on. But she's part of our congregational organizing team, which is made up of members of our congregations that come together monthly and figure out kind of how to be the conduits of our work into these congregations. Of course, as I mentioned, having just me as the staff, I really rely on those incredible partners out in our congregations. Another part of our work, of course, I mentioned is supporting Street Voices of Change. So Street Voices of Change is a group of people with lived experience of homelessness, and that group is autonomous. It is created by people who have experienced homelessness. It is led by people who have experienced homelessness, and they are our partners in this work and really provide us with guidance in how to do this work. They meet twice a week. They come together, they create power together, they create community together, and they identify goals that are important to them to make a difference for their community, and then organize to meet those goals. One of the goals that they have is training the adult shelter staff on the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights, which was created by Street Voices of Change and is now part of the Hennepin County adult shelter contracts. So they're training all the shelter staff across all of the adult shelters on what does this mean, why is it important, and asking for a commitment from shelter staff to uphold that Residents Bill of Rights. Also on an ongoing basis, Street Voices is providing feedback to the Hennepin County system. Hennepin County is kind of the largest provider in the homelessness response system. They oversee and do the contracts for all of the adult shelters. They have a number of different case management teams, including street outreach case management, shelter case management. And so they are doing a lot within the community to work on supporting folks to getting out of homelessness. They engage with Street Voices of Change twice each month, and then also have different, review panels for grants and feedback panels where they're bringing in the expertise of Street Voices of Change to inform the system. And it has been a really fruitful relationship that has built over time. And as I mentioned, the solutions that we know work, those solutions get brought to Hennepin County, and when they implement them, we really see a difference. And then, of course, we have our faith communities, and you all are part of this work. And I do hope that, after today especially, you'll continue to be a part of this work. One of the things that I think is most important for our faith communities is that we're seeing the humanity in each other, as well as in every person who is experiencing homelessness and housing instability. And recognizing that full dignity and full humanity in people is truly transformative. We want to be breaking stigma. We want to be breaking stereotypes and coming without judgment, learning from folks who have lived experience, and standing next to them and standing behind them in their work. We're lifting up their voices. We're making sure that the community is supported to be able to do the work that they know that needs to happen. And then, of course, we're engaging you all in things like legislative advocacy, working for change, supporting our different programs, supporting our direct service, supporting our emergency rental assistance. We cannot do this work without our congregations, and so you all are very important in that. So I want to leave some time for Q&A, and then, like I said, Holly's going to have a little something, and then we have somebody to close us out. Michelle has a slide to close us out, but I'd love to really hear from folks. What's on your mind? What questions come up? I'll do my best to answer. I don't always have the answers, but I'll do my best.
I have a question about the basic literacy of the homeless people. If they aren't able to sign contracts, they aren't able to read them, how is this dealt with?
That's a really good question. I don't have any hard data, hard statistics on literacy. I'd say that based on, the folks that I know that have experiences of homelessness, most people have enough of a level of literacy that they're able to navigate the basics. But that is one of the ways that case management can be really helpful. If it's a housing case manager and they're working with somebody, they're going to be equipped to support that person if they have limited literacy. And then as well, maybe let's say someone works with a housing case manager and then gets housed, but they have some limitations. They might then be referred to an ongoing case manager that can help them to navigate things if they're not able to on their own. Thank you. We had a hand over here as well.
Are there any studies looking at the effectiveness of Housing First programs for Indigenous people?
Great question. So I don't know, I'm sure there are. I don't know of any top of mind. Housing First is a model that is, at this point, pretty much a nationally accepted best practice where essentially there's no prerequisites for somebody accessing housing, that if someone is able to be housed, get into housing, then other needs that they have can be met, such as if they need chemical health support or if they need employment support. And so Housing First has been shown to be effective generally at helping folks to have better outcomes long term. In terms of the Indigenous population specifically, I don't know offhand, but that is certainly something that I'll keep an eye on. Thank you.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I have a question about the children. How do they know which school to go to, and is there a liaison at the school to make sure they get there and that they can eat?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when a child is experiencing homelessness, there's actually a federal law that supports that they are able to stay in their same school, and there are additional supports provided to them. And so the Minneapolis public school system has homeless and highly mobile dedicated staff that work to make sure that that child has transportation to their school wherever they are staying, and make sure that they get whatever services that they might need. And then in addition, the big family shelter downtown, People Serving People, they also have staff that help to navigate and ensure that children have what they need to stay in their school. The law, I believe it's called the McKinney-Vento law. And so that does protect children to be able to maintain their education, get them the supports that they need, even when they are experiencing homelessness. Yeah.
Yeah, a question from our some of our online listeners. There's been a lot of media attention to the impact of fraud in various programs, including housing programs. I think there was a story just today. How has that affected your work? Has it yet had any actual impact on policy or resources? So if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. So the news is really focused on a program right now that is called Housing Stabilization Services. That is a program that Minnesota launched, I believe it was 2020, 2021, something like that basically allowed providers that were assisting folks to have to get into housing and stay stable. They allowed those providers to bill Medicaid for those services. It was a recognition that housing is healthcare. What ended up happening in the community that we saw was that a huge number of new providers sort of popped up and were trying to provide these services. Some of them we know to have been effective. We've had folks who have talked about the help that they have received through housing stabilization services to get into housing, to stay housed. And we saw that there were some that seemed to be more predatory, and we weren't as familiar with them. They were kind of popping up saying, can we talk to these people? And so there was definitely some concerns, the red flags that were raised. In terms of our direct work at Align, there isn't a ton of overlap, but what we have seen is that with the loss of some of those services, folks who are housing unstable do have additional risks. They might not have the support they need to stay stable. We have seen that folks are, having a lot of sort of anxiety around, is this going to impact my housing? My understanding is that program did not do direct payments for rent, so it should not necessarily sort of be a direct withdrawal of rent payments. However, we know that the system doesn't always work smoothly, and there were some programs that were billing to that program instead of a different program. And so they will then need to switch back. And, we know based on our emergency rental assistance program that there are people who fall through the cracks. So we expect that we will see in our emergency rental assistance applications that if some billing situation happened wrong, or, it didn't get switched over the way it was supposed to, that somebody might owe back rent that was not their responsibility. And so we know that there are those gaps in the system. It's gonna be rocky because the HSS program, I believe, was completely turned off as of October 31st. So yet to come. Were there more online questions, or did we want to go?
A second online question, which is, what do you think are going to be the most important legislative goals in this area for the upcoming legislative session?
Yep. And if I may, Katie, could we broaden that out to also hear from you about the ways that Align prepares congregations to effectively lobby?
Yes, absolutely. So being that we're not in session right now, we're sort of in this preparation time. I mentioned the coalitions that we participate in. So the two primary coalitions are the Homes for All Coalition, which is statewide organizations from across the state, and the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. We also are part of two very specific coalitions, one of which is focused on a long-term goal of having a statewide constitutional amendment for housing, similar to the Legacy Amendment for arts and culture. That would create dedicated revenue, about $450 million of dedicated revenue per year. So that's a long-term goal legislatively. And then we're also part of a coalition that is specifically focused on homelessness prevention funding. That is called the Erase campaign. So kind of at a broad point right now, we know that any legislation is going to be very difficult this legislative session. It is not a budget year, and so there's not going to be a ton of appetite for anything that is going to cost money. And we know that our state is facing a deficit in the future. And so the fiscal side of it is going to be very difficult. And we know that particularly the prevention funding is so critical, so cost effective, that is going to be absolutely one of our number one priorities, to have additional funding beyond the base of that funding. So the state program is called FHPAP, and we will be certainly focused on that. More to come on whatever else we might be getting behind within our coalitions, but certainly that prevention funding is going to be a big piece. As we get closer to the legislative session, we are more than happy to be able to come into congregations to do advocacy training if folks are not as familiar with legislative advocacy. We also prepare, we have an online advocacy ally action that folks can sign up for so they can get pinged when it's time to take action. And that might look like, can you send a letter? Can you do a phone call? Can you do an email? We will, do letters of support for different coalitions. We will be up at the Capitol. We also have the Homeless Day on the Hill, which this year I believe is scheduled for Wednesday, March 11th. And that's when we get as many folks in our congregation to come out to the Capitol, along with folks with lived experience, to be talking to legislators about this important issue. And sometimes that looks like, please support this particular legislation. And sometimes it looks like, let's just raise our voices to help people understand, legislators understand more about the issue of homelessness. And so as we get closer to the legislative session, those who are, interested, and I'm sure, Holly with the organizing, the congregational organizing, will have opportunities for that. And I will also mention, even though I'm not at that slide yet, that if you go on our website, alignmpls.org, I'll put it up at the end, there is a dialog box that pops up asking if you'd like to sign up for our monthly newsletter. And that is a great way to stay on top of different things happening with our organization as well as in the broader community, and just get that monthly update. And we do include legislative information through that newsletter. What other questions? Oh, I see one here.
Make sure you have no breath after the word giver, please, bottom of 6. And then
Do you know about Zombie Theater?
Yes.
And they're coming here for a performance. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes. Zamia Theater, great friends of ours. We have a number of our Street Voices of Change folks who participate as actors with Zamia Theater. Zamia is made up of people with lived experiences of homelessness. They create original plays based on people's experiences. And so it's a really powerful avenue to connect with people's stories and experiences, of course, right? The power of art, the power of creative expression. And so, yes, they have a play coming up called The Waiting List is Full. They have a few different performances throughout the Metro. And I believe the one here is November 21st, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, there's going to be a discussion panel after that performance that will include 2 people from Street Voices of Change who are going to be there to share their experience. So if that, if you're interested in attending, I definitely encourage you to attend that one. There's going to be some great perspectives offered. Thank you.
So I actually have a question
Great.
regarding your the rental vouchers. It's kind of a two-pronged question. Are you anticipating a reduction in the amount of rental assistance that you can give on a monthly basis? And could you just talk more about the application process? Is it time limited as to how long you can be on it? Do you have to reapply and things like that?
Yes, thank you. So our emergency rental assistance program is just one time. And we do ask that the crisis that somebody has experienced is a shorter duration, so 2 months or less. And that's really to be able to, utilize our funding as much as possible. And this year to next year, we are projecting that we're going to have a reduced amount of direct assistance funding. But the good news is that any additional dollars that come in that are dedicated to that direct assistance funding go right to keeping people in their homes. And so we always take those opportunities if we get, individual donors or significant gifts, or sometimes congregations do a specific ask for that emergency rental assistance program. We can then increase how much we're able to provide each week. On average, each week, we're usually helping 2 to 3 households to stay in their home right now. It will probably be slightly less next year. In terms of the application process, we have a few minimum requirements that folks must meet, and we do have some documentation requirements. And then we have 3 of our direct service congregations who provide an intake site and have volunteers and staff that will sit with the person who is applying, take a look at their documents, complete the application with them, and then that gets submitted to our organization. We have a weekly, what's called review team, that goes through each application and then decides if an application meets our requirements, and then also provides. There are weeks when we don't have enough funding to provide for all of the applications, so that team then does prioritize applications, generally based on risk factors of the household. Do they have higher risk of falling into homelessness, based on a couple of different demographic factors? Thanks for
Thank
that
you.
question.
Any other questions?
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Holly. Thank you again for being here. If you have questions that come up afterward, talk to Holly, talk to Elena, talk to me. And I hope that we will, have your continued engagement and involvement. And Holly's going to talk about ways that can happen.
So as Katie mentioned, I am the Westminster representative on the Align organizing team. And what that means is that I am that conduit between the Align staff staff and organization to how Westminster gets involved. And because this is something that I am passionate about, I of course want to do all the things. I want to do the advocacy. I want to do a drive for funding for the rental assistance. I want to do a drive for whatever, if it's diapers or if it's feminine hygiene products or certain food. I want to do all the things. And I realized 2 things. First of all, I can't do all the things. And I need help to figure out which are the things that we should do first, or which are the things that we should do next. So I am looking for other people who are also passionate about this organization and this cause, who would be part of the Westminster team, and we would help determine what are the actions that we want to encourage the Westminster congregation to do and to take part in and to support. So if this is also a cause that is close to your heart, I just put a simple sign-up sheet on the table there. Just share your name and your contact information. I will get in touch with you. We can talk a little bit, or we can talk before the service starts at 10:30, and see how you would like to get involved. Maybe you are very passionate about the advocacy piece, and that's how you would like to engage Westminster and get others. Maybe you are passionate about a funding drive to support that rental assistance program. So we can figure out how we as a congregation and as a team can best support Align and the work that they do. That's it for me.
And from the back of the room, I will just add, you are welcome to pick up one of the monthly guides. And thank you, Holly. There's also a note about a November 20 open house that I will be there. Come join me.
Me too.
It will be a great opportunity. Yes, and Holly will be there to meet some of the other congregations that are involved in supporting this work. And those questions that you forgot to ask Katie today, you can ask her, and there will be other people there as well. Also encourage you to do the Interfaith Thanksgiving service. That will be another opportunity where all of these congregations who come together to honor the dignity of each other and our siblings who are experiencing homelessness will be together, and the offering from that service supports the work of Align. And one last thing, Kelsey would want me to tell you thank you for all of the ways that your gifts are currently supporting Align. This is one of our foundational commitments here at Westminster, and we are looking for ways to even strengthen it. So thank you all.
So, next week, I want to thank Katie for sharing her insights and perspectives. We have some new challenges, it seems, for our congregation to be able to help and assist with. Next week, we will welcome members of our Westminster community partners, Right to Hope, Serving Justice, impacted people in Minnesota County jails, workhouses, and prisons. And we look forward to seeing you then.